Let me tell you about the panelists that Rajiv will be moderating. And they are a great group of folks. First, Julie Oakley is the acting program manager within the Office of Transit, New Starts, Operations, and Transportation Alternatives at the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. You can't get all that on a bumper sticker.
I know. We just call it the Office of Transit. Steve's probably like, you could have cut out 5 of those words.
That's okay. It's all important stuff. She's the lead for the Office of Major Capital Projects, which is responsible for the Providence Intermodal Transportation Center, the Pawtucket Central Falls Train Station Project, and the Rhode Island Travel Plaza and Transit Hub projects. Prior to joining the public sector, she worked for a large private architecture and engineering firm working in international development, very international, managing a 5-year, $62 million program supporting the Afghanistan Office of Economic Growth and Infrastructure. If you can do that, you can definitely strengthen Rhode Island, I'm sure. She has a BS in Environmental Science from Marist College and a Master's in Urban and Regional Planning from Virginia Tech. Next is a key go-to person for Grow Smart Rhode Island and many of the transit stakeholders in Rhode Island, and that's Amy Pettine, who many of you know very well. Amy's Executive Director of the Planning Department of the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. In that position, she's responsible for advancing long-range strategic planning initiatives, service and schedules, federal programs, and policy development. She's never bored, that's for sure. Some of the efforts that she's involved in right now are, or has been involved in, are designing RIPTA's first rapid bus line, ongoing involvement in investments in Kennedy Plaza, ongoing involvement in advancing a multi-hub intermodal transit system. She graduated from Providence College and has a master's in planning from the University of Pennsylvania. And she is very proud, and I'm proud for her, of her work earlier in her career as an AmeriCorps Vista and as a former staff assistant to former Congressman Barney Frank. Our next panelist is another great Grow Smart partner and collaborator, Jan Brodie. I'm sure many of you know Jan from her earlier work, not too long ago, but earlier work as Executive Director of the I-195 Redevelopment District Commission. Jan currently is Executive Director of the Pawtucket Foundation, working with the city to advance economic redevelopment, including the transit-oriented development master plan around the newly funded commuter rail station, as well as working on development along the Blackstone River, now part of the new national park, and the city's downtown and arts district. She has over 25 years of experience in managing signature economic development projects throughout the Northeast. She received her MBA in finance from the Wharton School, not a bad place to get your MBA in finance from, and a master's in architecture from the GFSA at the University of Pennsylvania. And last but not least is probably the most overqualified research assistant Grow Smart Rhode Island has ever had on a volunteer basis, Roger Leaf. Roger has been a resident of New York City and a nearly daily rider of public transit since 1972, and has a lot of ties to Providence, where his 2 sons have lived for many years, going back to 1999. Over his 38-year career on Wall Street, Roger worked as a public finance banker and a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, Swiss, I guess I should say, and BNY Mellon. More recently, he has become a real transit expert, visionary, planner, and writer. He's written several articles on various transit topics, including Thinking Outside the Bus, Creative Ideas for Rhode Island Public Transit. He has a BA in economics from Heidelberg University and an MBA in finance from NYU Stern School of Business. So as you can see, we've got a high-powered, versatile, and diverse group of folks, and I'm going to turn it over to Rajiv to move it forward. Thanks, Rajiv.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you all so much for being here. Before I get started, I actually just wanted to take a moment to congratulate Scott. He recently received an award for his community service from the Leadership Rhode Island organization. So congratulations, Scott. I think that's very much a testament to his vision and for the work that he does, and we're very appreciative for that, so thank you. And thanks to Scott and his team for having me here today. I'll have to admit, I don't think I'm the most obvious candidate to be moderating this panel. As a physician and software entrepreneur, I know almost nothing about mass transit, but I do think this is a topic that's important, and I find it fascinating, and I said yes and agreed to participate for a few reasons. First is I have a lifelong commitment to promoting health and well-being. I've spent the past 15 years of my life promoting public health, prevention of chronic disease, through the promotion of healthy lifestyles. And I think this is a topic we don't talk about enough when we think about mass transit. I haven't really heard it talked as much about today, but this is a really critical piece. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation very simply says that better transportation options equals healthier lives. Walkable, bikeable, transit-oriented communities are associated with healthier populations that have more physical activity, that have lower body weight, that have lower rates of traffic injuries, that have lower rates of pollution. It turns out that the risk of obesity increases by 6% for every hour that you spend in your car in a daily commute. So it's critical that we get people out of cars and using mass transportation. And it turns out that people who use mass transit get 8 to 33 minutes more physical activity every single day. So more public transportation equals healthier lifestyles. I think that's very important for us here in Rhode Island. The second reason that I'm very interested in this topic is I have a vested interest in attracting a talent pool, a millennial talent pool to Rhode Island, to nurturing the talent pool that we have and to retaining that talent pool. You may have heard, Scott mentioned this earlier, that Virgin Pulse is expanding here in Rhode Island. We're planning to add up to 300 new jobs over the next few years. And we're very, very focused on hiring technology-savvy, public service-oriented millennials who are after a social mission in the work that they do. And what we know is that millennials have a propensity for living in urban environments. They want to have urban-type options. They're driving less, as you heard earlier. They're owning cars less. They want more options and more reliable options for commuting. Turns out that millennials also like to have lots of different communication methodologies open to them. And when a typical millennial takes a trip, they use 3 different transportation methods in one trip alone. So you might see a millennial walk to a certain location, get on a bus, take a bike share, 3 different, on average, transportation types to get to a single place. Millennials also, as you may have learned, like to do work and use technology while they travel. And we prefer that they do that on mass transit than when driving in a car, right? So millennials want access to technology. They want to be able to be productive while they're getting from point A to point B. We're also focused on our carbon footprint. We're focused on the environment more so than other generations. And we're looking to save money. You've probably heard a lot about the public student loan challenges that our generation faces. And this is a way to help reduce costs for millennials. So that's really the second reason I'm interested in this topic. And then finally, you know, as someone who's lived in Rhode Island for 16 years, I live downtown here in Providence, I'm very keenly interested in what we can do to drive economic development and continue the momentum that we've started to build. In my research on this topic, I learned about a concept that you may be familiar with. It's called agglomeration. And agglomeration is just sort of a fancy way of saying having more people in the same place at the same time. And as more people collect in a city center, it turns out that more jobs collect in that center as well, and that boosts wages, and it also boosts economic productivity. And what's great is that public transportation actually contributes very significantly to agglomeration. There's a planning scholar by the name of Daniel Chapman from University of California, Berkeley, and he published a study on this topic, and he found some really interesting things. First is that every time a metro area adds 4 seats to rail and buses per 1,000 residents, the central city ends up with 320 more employees per square mile, which is an increase of 19%. Adding 85 rail miles delivers a 7% increase in employees in a city center, and a 10% expansion in transit service produced a wage increase of between $53 and $194 per worker per year in the city center, and the gross metropolitan product rose between 1 and 2%. So a really strong economic development argument. I think Buff Chase was asking about this earlier, for having more mass transit in our city. So those are some of the reasons why I'm interested in this. I hope we get to talk about some of that on the panel today. What I want to do now is actually have each of the panelists spend about 10 minutes introducing their particular project or concept to us. And then we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. Given the turnout here, I imagine a lot of you have questions, so we're going to have plenty of time to get through all of those questions. So I think we'll get started with Julie Oakley. Julie is representing the Amtrak Station Multimodal Transit Hub, and I think we're all very excited to hear about this project. So please welcome Julie.
Thank you for having me, and I'm very excited to be here as a newbie at RIDOT. I've only been there 2 years, so from state standard, that's pretty young to come into state government after spending about 15 years in the private sector. But I'm very excited to be a part of RIDOT, and I think we're on the cusp of some very exciting projects in transit, one of which I'm going to talk about, and then Amy and Jan are obviously going to talk about 2 others. So I'm sure you're dying to hear about the Providence Intermodal Transportation Center, which is a P3 project that we currently have going on here at RIDOT. Okay, let's see if I can use this, guys. Okay, great. So for a moment, we're going to take a pause and step back and think about where we were. And historically, Kennedy Plaza and the Providence train station were co-located. But in the 1980s, with the relocation of the rail line and the relocation of Providence Station, we separated the 2 of them. But in that process, we created the Capital Center Development District, an amazing opportunity for economic development, just around 80 acres in the heart of downtown Providence. So it was a wonderful opportunity for economic development, but at that point in time, we broke the transit connection between the rail and the bus. So now, about 30 years later, here we are reconnecting those 2 elements. And that's what this project is all about. It's about connecting the bus and the rail back together in a cohesive way, but also using it as a way to spur economic development. So kind of, as Jared talked about, this is kind of our sexy project. It's very exciting, very sexy, but we do hope that it's going to do 2 things. 1, enhance our transit connections, but also spur economic development in the short and long term. So hopefully we're going to do it right. And we have the opportunity to do it right now. So we're really excited about that, especially at RIDOT, obviously. And with all of our partners, RIPTA, of course, is one, the City of Providence, Commerce RI, the Department of Administration. It's very much a statewide effort. Those are all people that are at the table currently assisting us in this project. So you'll kind of see their logos across the bottom, but they're stakeholders and they're actively engaged in the project, which is very exciting. So right now, Capital Center has been developed in a very exciting way. The Providence Place Mall, high-end residential, corporate headquarters. But there are parcels that are remaining that haven't been redeveloped or developed to what we feel are their highest potential. So here we are again, using Providence train station as a way to spur economic development, create a stronger identity of place, and establish this strong transit connection. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background if you're not very well versed in the facts about how strong of a transit connection we're talking about, the Providence train station is a regional leader in transportation. It is the 13th busiest Amtrak station out of 510. Think about that. That's amazing that we're in the top 15 on Amtrak. That's incredible. We're also one of the 3 busiest MBTA stations outside of Boston. Another incredible stat. So we have an influx of people entering our city on a daily basis. Now you combine that with RIPTA ridership and the relocation of some of Kennedy Plaza's routes and amenities and things into a cohesive development with the train station, you're looking at upwards of 40,000 passengers a day traveling through this one location. So it's really an incredible opportunity that we're looking to capitalize on. So how did we get to where we are? Funding's always a big issue, right? How are you going to fund this incredible project? And in 2014, Rhode Islanders voted yes to move Rhode Island forward on the number 6 bond question, which was transit funding, to relocate these 2 modes in a cohesive manner within the state, and there were $35 million in the bond. That same year, RIDOT also applied for a Tiger grant to look at planning this development out. And that Tiger grant is still being actively used today. And you'll probably hear Amy mention Tiger funding. You'll probably mention, Jan will probably mention it as part of the Rhode Island, the Pawtucket Central Falls train station project. It's been an incredibly valuable asset to us in the transportation community. And so has this bond. It's been the funding that we've been able to leverage to get the private sector interested in this development opportunity. And the planning grant itself has been a tremendous asset to us in looking at alternative analysis, and even as recently as last week, we held a public workshop to look at amenities that the public would like to have within the bus hub there. So simultaneously, as we're looking at this public-private partnership, we're using the planning grant money that we got, the funding we have in hand, to plan out this investment appropriately. So I'm going to be short and sweet. I'm going to concede some of my time to Amy, who's got a very exciting project to talk about as well. But right now, within the process for the public-private partnership for PITC, as we kind of shorten it up, is to really look to work with the development community to build a world-class transportation center. So, just as one example, a Union Station in Denver, something along those lines where you can see the modes converging as one. The train station has bus, bike, pedestrian, rail, and we're looking to further enhance those and do a public-private partnership where we can look to those remaining parcels in the Capital Center District that haven't been developed and really spur development to identify a greater sense of place and neighborhood in this area. With the State House as the backdrop, which is incredible. You walk out of the train station, have you ever seen anything more beautiful? It's gorgeous. So we have issued an RFQ in the summer of last year, looking for development partners. We got responses, and we've been going through the procurement process. So as an active procurement, you'll have to forgive me, I can't share too much about that. But we have already established a list of respondents who are interested in working with us on them. We've held interviews and gained a lot of perspective on the future of the project and what needs to be in the RFP when we relinquish that, hopefully in the short term. But it's a very exciting project that we at RIDOT and all of our planning partners are very excited to be a part of, and we're really looking forward to what's to come. Specifically with this effort. So I'm going to hand it over to Amy next.
All right, so please join me in welcoming Amy Pettine, who's going to tell us about the Downtown Transit Corridor.
I know John is really nervous about the number of slides that I have, so get ready for me to talk fast. I just could not pass up this opportunity with all of you in the room to talk about not only the DTC, but put it in context for the other projects you're hearing about today, but also the larger picture of where we're going with transit in Rhode Island. Okay, so like many great transit projects, the Downtown Transit Connector is many years in the making, and I'm going all the way back 10 years to when Congressman Cicilline was mayor and he kicked off Transit 2020. I know some of you in this room were involved in that process and have stuck with us. And that moved on to studies back in the 2009-10 timeframe where we came out with a series of recommendations such as our R-line, intermodal connections, and pursuing a streetcar. And then we went on to the Core Connector study where we did an alternatives analysis and started the environmental work on that streetcar. So then a couple of things were happening simultaneously. The city of Providence applied first unsuccessfully, and then they were successful in getting a US DOT Tiger grant. And that was in 2014. And during that time, RIPTA was also doing a comprehensive operational analysis, taking a deep dive into our service plan. And at the tail end of that, we were also gearing up for the bond campaign for the intermodal facility and looking at how we could extend the connectivity in the downtown area. As most folks in this room, I'm sure know, the city was unable to secure the funding to do a $100 million plus streetcar, but we all got together and with the stars aligned, and we repurposed that money to do a $17 million bus-based investment, still connecting those key activity centers. So, like I said, that major redesign was happening in 2014. I won't go into all these details, but I do think this really set the stage for not just a downtown project, but how we think about building the network and, you know, kind of building upon a lot of the ideas Jarrett talked about earlier in terms of setting up hubs and high-frequency networks and really just creating a user-friendly system. And this really set the stage for a lot of these capital improvements that we're a part of today, whether it be the DTC, the PITC, the Pawtucket bus hub that we're building adjacent to the commuter rail station. So really thinking about a statewide network. And the story still remains true in downtown. I mean, this was true when consultants told us 8 years ago, gosh, Providence has really great bones for a streetcar. And what they meant by that was not only was there an opportunity to convert surface parking lots to redevelopable land, but within a walking distance of our original corridor, which is pretty similar to the corridor we have today, you have 50,000 people working downtown, 35,000 college students, over 2,000 hotel rooms. And so again, this opportunity to acknowledge that the down city was expanding both to Cap Center and down to the hospital district, and that there was this real opportunity also with the jewelry district to start to make these connections for creating a high-frequency corridor. Now, as many of you know, operations is always one of our big challenges, and I'm so thankful Jarrett pointed that out earlier. So what we did was we got creative and said, look, this can serve the downtown and be this hop-on, hop-off walk extender, but can also be an opportunity to create more one-seat rides coming into the downtown and make the whole metro regional system work better. So we are actually aligning 7 existing bus routes and timing them to create a high-frequency, 5-minute frequency corridor. And so the goals, like I said, still harken back to that original study, but we really want to improve connectivity in the downtown, foster connectivity between different bus routes and ease of transfer, not just making all that transfer happen in Kennedy Plaza, and really create a linear hub in the downtown. So how are we spending that $17 million? A lot of it is on stations, streetscape, and signals, and thinking about the branding and how we can improve upon fare policies to make it easier to move about the cabin. So stations, there's 6 paired stations. We've already had some branding workshops, and we had a public workshop. There'll be another one next month, but we really want to take these as an opportunity to showcase Providence as a smart city, so thinking about technology, showcase Providence as a canvas for the arts, and really, again, make it really useful in mobility, complete streets, how to incorporate bike share stations and other elements to provide multimodal options. So there's a look at them along the corridor. And really, at the end of the day, this is about balancing, not having cars, again, dominate the downtown, but rethinking our streetscape. So you'll see all of these features in the new corridor, which is a 1.5-mile corridor. Signalization, transit signal priority is something we did with our R line. We've had immense success. We're going to do this. It not only benefits transit and gives us priority, but it actually improves overall traffic flows throughout the downtown. So again, helping with that circulation, using technology to improve the transit speed and reliability in the downtown. I mentioned there'll be multiple routes coming together to create this high-frequency corridor. Those routes serve nearly 10,000 riders today. That's what our R line also serves today. So again, really focusing on bringing people who are already riding transit, making this a better, more reliable service. And branding will be really important, not just for us, but again for the city, as we continue to work together to really make this a showcase corridor. Been a lot of talk about, gosh, why do I have to pay $2 to go, from Kennedy Plaza to the train station? We hear you. I won't get into all the challenges of how you implement it, but just know that it's on our radar to think about prepaid boarding, all-door boarding, and maybe how to get that fare-free service in the downtown. So we got the Tiger Grant in 2014, and we got the green light this year. We're moving out of conceptual engineering into preliminary engineering, so this is happening fast and furious. But we do plan to be operational by January of 2019. And again, stars aligning with many other projects happening, such as the one Julie just talked about. And now I'm going to go really rapid fire and just say, how is this happening in context? We've got many hubs in the state that we're investing in. Newport is under construction right now. We're, again, partnering with Pawtucket on the bus hub rail station, but also acknowledging places like Warwick and URI are big connections for us. So think about it as like the frame of the house And moving forward, we hope to really make these good suburban hubs as well as building these hubs in the city. I think most people are familiar with our line, but like Jarrett, we are focused on frequency, and again, that's a big feature of the DTC. We're excited about real-time information. If you don't have the transit app, go download it. You can get our system in real time today. Our website's going to be relaunching soon with that information. Our capital program reflects a huge investment in bus stops, which are the front door to our system. Fare technology, we are out to bid soon on fare upgrades. We're going to an account-based system like the Charlie card. Mobile phone payments will be here within the next year and a half. And we are focused on speed, being more competitive with the auto in Rhode Island. So a lot of signal priority expansion work. We're doing a bus on shoulder study. So again, we are looking at investing in making this bus system as attractive, but also as useful as possible for Rhode Islanders. And we are aware of this issue in the rural suburban area and the equity issues Jarrett talked about, and there's a lot going on in this area too, and thinking about how to improve accessibility for aging in place. And there is a long-range transportation plan that the statewide planning program is kicking off next month. We're excited with DOT to be a part of that conversation, thinking big, thinking bold about where we can go. And you know, Julie and Steve and the team at RIDOT, and I got most of my team here today. I have to give them a shout out. They're the hardest working folks and care and are so passionate about our system. And there's just so many great things going on, and we're really looking forward to where we can go together.
Thank you, Amy. Now we'd like to welcome Jan Brodie. Jan is going to tell us about the Pawtucket Central Falls Commuter Rail Station. Please welcome Jan.
Just make sure I'm going in the right way. So you've heard a lot about transit and how it creates or spurs on development. There's a very close connection. I'm here to talk about the development side. My background is as a real estate developer, largely in private, a lot of mills. And so as much as I love all the transit stuff, my knowledge base is really about the real estate. I will start with just explaining on this slide, those three logos indicate that right off the bat we're a public-private partnership. The foundation is private, and we're a 501c3, and then we're working with two cities, not just one, two cities that are in this transit-oriented development area around the new train station. And we've been working on this for years and years. Probably heard we got a Tiger grant last year. Very exciting. It was years and years of planning for it, working on it, applying for it, not getting it, and finally we got it. And then the state's DOT stepped up with TIP and other federal funds and came up with a big chunk of what was still needed. And then the cities came up with additional funds. All told, a $40 million project. And then shortly thereafter, RIPTA applied for money. They got federal money. And so they too are able to progress along a similar kind of a schedule. We are going to end up with a real transit hub. Both of them are going to be co-located and working well together so that their timing works out so that by the time 2019 for RIPTA and 2020 comes along, we will have a transit center. It'll be wonderful. You can see the schedule. The problem is that this is what that money buys. It buys the train tracks. You will see, the governor mentioned earlier, the signs around the state that talk about on time, on budget, new project. We will get that, but it will be for the train tracks, access to them on one side with a stair going up, a lovely pedestrian walkway over, and stairs coming down on the other side. Perhaps a kiss and ride drop off, not even sure about that. It's a lot of money to move some tracks around and to do what I just described. It does not buy, for example, what we have on here is the P&W rail yard. Those parking spaces over there, doesn't buy that, and it doesn't buy the property on the north of the train tracks. We have to work on all of that. This is some of the work that's involved, and we are on a very tight schedule. The governor has stated it will be open by the beginning of 2020. So back up, we have 2 years and 9 months to figure all of this out, with one of the most important pieces of it in double asterisks at the bottom, paying for it all. Right now, we are working on how do we get it rezoned. It's not zoned. We can use zoning as a tool to try and incentivize how we want people to treat their properties and who we want to come. Parking, do we require it? Do we have no parking? Let the market determine it. What do you do with the site area? Where do the roads go? We have, unlike the 195 land that I had worked on before this, we don't own the land. We have to figure out how to get all the people who do own the land to work cooperatively. Right, the two cities are working together. They signed an agreement so that they would have a joint planning commission to start to look at permitting across the line and forget that there's really a city line in between. This is a transit-oriented development area. It's a district. So to make sure that there is consistent zoning and permitting and fee structure between the two cities. Data collection, what's the infrastructure? If you pave over a street because you want to get to the train station, what's underneath it? Do we have enough utilities to provide for future investment, or is it just for right now? How do you plan for the future? It's very tricky. Meanwhile, you have to make it attractive and safe and parkable in the short term. Economic development, I'll talk more about that one. Basically, if you build it, they will come, doesn't work here. We will get a train station. We will hopefully figure out all the access, the beautification, the safety, the lighting, but we still have monetary problems. Jared had mentioned geometry. I'd talk about simple math. It just doesn't add up. Obviously, public has to be informed all the way through. These are existing conditions. The train station is northwest of downtown, and it is embedded in a neighborhood or mills. We have 2 million square feet of historic mill around it, a lot of it in campus style, so there aren't roads going through it. It's landlocked. The roads that are around are small. We have to figure out how to get access points throughout. And as you can see in this lower one, it's cobblestone and then it dead ends. And the train station is just beyond those trees. What do we want to be? These are a couple slides from other transit-oriented development areas, Mansfield, Attleboro, and Warwick. Those are the buildings that are going up now or have gone up in those areas. Is that who we are? We heard a little about social equity. We are embedded in a community that already exists. Those are some of the buildings house manufacturing, people are hired working in those places. Do we want to have them move simply because it's not new and pretty? Not really. We want this to be a true mixed use, mixed age, mixed kind of manufacturing, mixed jobs, a real community, just like cities that develop organically. We want to be able to do that. We want to learn and not do what, we want to take your leftovers that are too prosperous in Portland, bring them here, and we don't want to become so prosperous we have that problem. We want to mix it up. What's in color are outlined of different private owners of the property. For example, the one in purple is a recycling center business. The one in red is New England Northeast Knitting. They make the little skinny elastic thread that is used largely in medical uses. They're operating businesses. Some of the others don't want to move, don't want to change. How do you, for example, how do you get to those properties up in pale blue at the top? There is no walkway down. we have to figure out, get the stakeholders that are involved to work together to, in some cases, use the ground floor as a walkway through. Possibly do some takings, hopefully just get some agreement to sell some properties that are being underutilized or not used at all. And just for the fun of it, to point out at the bottom sort of right-hand side, just above what's kind of yellow, is Isle Brewers. They just had their opening last week, and so they are part of our TOD. 5 breweries going on there. Very exciting. We want to tie in with them and with the downtown. These are historic districts, either already certified or eligible for historic. And I point this out because this is both an asset as well as a way to try and be a lobbyist for what I thought was a very successful program from 2003 to 2008 was the state's historic tax credit program. If we could bring some of that back, that would help fill that gap in the math that I was talking about. It also can mean that you are limited in what you can demolish or what you can do with windows. So we have to tread lightly and figure out what's important, how do we use the preservation of these buildings to our advantage. And then tying to our existing access. The city of Pawtucket has 5 exits off of 95. This property around the train station does not have immediate access to the highways. So we have to make sure that our walkways, our bikeways, our roadways are wide enough and direct enough, and our signage and our lighting connects to these exits. It's not, we don't want to be an island. We have to be connected. A slide to just show what's being thought of for RIPTA. This is the bus hub. It comes off of a street, does a turnaround, come back, and it ties to 2 other kind of super stops that bring you into downtown, the R line, everything that you just heard Amy talking about. The problem is this is sitting right now on private land. Nothing is easy when you don't own all the real estate, but everything has to work together. We've got our challenges, but it would work very nicely, and you could see the bridge across. It would tie in with the train track platform. Right now, we're focusing on just to the north, to the south, and what you can see along Barton Street is a wall of buildings, literally a wall. Mills added extensions, and they didn't necessarily need to have windows, so they just built right up against another building. How do you get from the train tracks on the north side up and through? We only own the little yellow pieces, the 440, 540. The city owns that and those 2 others. You can't get to those others, and you certainly can't get to the 2 million square feet of mill space, a lot of it up to the north. The zoning and planning will be done to accommodate pedestrians, bikes, vehicle. It will have certain heights given to it to allow for breathability, open space. The asset of having all of these campus-like mill spaces is that there's a lot of open space. Tying those together along with roadways can make for a really enjoyable experience. Full build-out. This is just a concept plan. VHB worked under DOT to do a very comprehensive and complete master plan, vision plan. And although this may take 20, 30 years, just heard that Capitol Center still has parcels that needs to be built. It could take that long in order for this to happen. But this is eventually, the dark brown roofed ones are all the new construction, what it could look like. What you see with the white roofs are the existing mills. As I said, we have 2 million square feet of historic mill. Another 2 million square feet of potential real estate can be built. And what we're working on now is who are we building for, how do we do it well, and make sure that it suits everybody all tied around this train station. So the last thing I would say is that none of it is possible unless you really have the numbers working. And the numbers don't work right now. The average rent in Pawtucket is about $1,000 a month for average size apartment. In Providence, it's about $1,300. That's average. I mean, they obviously go higher. And in Boston, they're $3,500, $4,000 a month. That's why the building boom is going on in Boston. You can afford to do it. The gap here is very significant. So without things like historic tax credits, rebuild tax credits, infrastructure money either coming from the feds or hopefully in this new budget, we won't be able to get there. So I'd ask for all of your support in some of these. They're not really subsidies, they are just ways to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And for the last presentation, we will invite Roger Leaf. He's going to tell us about his intrastate rail concept.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to start by talking about some of the things I think everybody in this room already knows, but just to highlight them again. We really have a transit network in Rhode Island that is not really working very well for all Rhode Islanders, and we see this by transit utilization figures, which have been flat. In fact, the last couple of years they've been going down slightly. There is broad coverage of the state, but actually ridership on public transit in Rhode Island is about half the national average. This has been particularly damaging to Rhode Island's cities. If you look at virtually all of, except for one neighborhood in the state, the city populations have been going down year over year while the suburban populations have been going up. And poor transit has hurt Rhode Island's regional competitiveness. If you compare the ridership of transit in Rhode Island to what you see in Connecticut or in Massachusetts, the numbers are significantly lower than they are here. And this has a very real effect on the economic competitiveness of the area. And to make businesses more competitive in Rhode Island, obviously transit is a key component of that. So what can we do to make things better? I think any conversation we have about transit in Rhode Island really starts with Kennedy Plaza. This is where 3/4 of all the bus routes and 60% of all the passengers end up. There are 44 bus routes that come into Kennedy Plaza to 15 different bus stops. And the challenge is that it's pretty much at capacity. So if you're trying to grow transit in Rhode Island and you have a single hub structure and that single hub is at capacity, you're facing a very real challenge. The single hub approach did make a lot of sense over time because it made it possible to get from any one place in the state to any other place in the state by only having to transfer once. I think that meant a lot to a lot of people. But it's really put a strain on Kennedy Plaza in particular, and that's also had implications for the surrounding area in terms of downtown development. Now, we just heard about moving this transit hub from Kennedy Plaza up to the train station, but if you have a single hub network and you pick it up from Kennedy Plaza and you move it to the train station, you really haven't solved the problem. And one thing that we have to spend a lot of time to be very focused on is that if we're going to build a new transit center at the train station, we want to be sure it's a 21st century center for a 21st century transit system. So the challenge here for the single hub system is that the farther you get away from Kennedy Plaza, the less efficient or the less effective the actual transit system works when you have a single hub system. And let me give you an example. This is actually a screenshot from the RIPTA trip planner. It shows a trip from the DMV down to Post Road in Warwick, which is a distance of a little less than 3 miles. If you go to the trip planner, it will tell you that there are 3 ways you can get there, 3 different bus routes. But because everything is sort of Kennedy Plaza centric, it means that it's very difficult to move east-west, if you will, as opposed to north-south. So here we have a distance that you can drive in a car in about 4 minutes. You could cover it on a bicycle in 20 minutes. You could walk it in under an hour, but it takes almost an hour and a half to get there by public transit today. And this is, very difficult on places like Warwick, which I'll use as an example, because if you can walk someplace in less time than it takes to ride there in public transit, you really don't have public transit. So the approach that would help to address this issue would be to create regional transit centers throughout the urban core of Warwick, Cranston, Pawtucket, Providence, East Providence, and so forth. This dramatically improves local mobility. It makes it much easier to get around in Warwick, for example. I mean, it follows pretty logically that if the best way to get around in Warwick is to have a Warwick hub. If you look at the numbers here, for example, the service area for the Warwick hub is about 150,000 people. That's obviously almost double the size of Warwick. So when you think about these hubs, they're labeled by the cities in which they happen to reside, but they don't necessarily serve that one city if you do it effectively. The service area for these various hubs should be driven by geography and not by political districts. So we can talk about more of that in the Q&A, but the idea here is that if you can distribute bus service to these regional hubs, you take an enormous amount of pressure off of Kennedy Plaza. That makes it more opportunity for development within the downtown area. And it also, when you start thinking about moving transit hubs from Kennedy Plaza to the train station, it dramatically changes the calculus of what that train station should look like. But the big challenge, if you have regional hubs like this, is how you connect them. How do you get from one hub to another? So it's very easy to move around in Warwick if you've got a Warwick hub, but if you're trying to go from Warwick to Providence, you really need a fast, frequent, and reliable connector between each of these transit hubs in order to get it to work. There are lots of options to do that. One is something like the R line, which is an express bus service that could connect these various transit hubs. The challenge with that is that you really have to deal with traffic that can affect reliability and timing. Also, this area that we're talking about is not really laid out in a grid. So some of the routes that you would have to follow to stay on the city streets are a little circuitous. And that can also make it a little bit more difficult to move through this area. BRT, or bus rapid transit, gets talked about a lot these days. It's dedicated right-of-ways, signal priority, and so on and so forth. That can speed traffic through the urban core. It can also make timing more reliable in terms of getting from point to point. But the roadways in this area, in many areas, are a challenge for BRT because it takes up a lot of space on what is scarce real estate on the roadways that you have. And the more robust your BRT system becomes, the more expensive it becomes. And at some point, it starts to rival the cost of light rail and other ways of getting around. For example, Hartford had a challenge here. They put in light rail, they put in BRT a couple of years ago, and it ended up costing them about $570 million, or about $61 million. Did I go? $61 million a mile. So at that price, you could have done something much more robust than even BRT. Light rail is an interesting option. It's expensive, But the nice thing about it is it allows you to take advantage of the unique geography of your urban core, which is that it's bisected by the northeast corridor. And if you have light rail that can move off of the road system for a good part of the distance from one to the other, what you really have is about 70% of the route is off-road. Any one of these three will face the same challenges moving through downtown Providence, and you can deal with that by having transit-only streets and other things. But once you get out of the downtown area, light rail gives you a real advantage in terms of speed. This is about a 14-mile distance from Pawtucket down to the Interlink. By light rail, you should be able to cover that in about 45 minutes with 10-minute headways between trains. So that makes it an attractive option. It's not the necessary component to make the regional hubs work, but it really is something that has very high capacity and very high speed. That's great for going north-south. You still have a need to move people east-west through the center core. And here in particular, if you look at, oops. Well, that didn't work. At any rate, in the area up here on the upper left, happens to be in the one area of the state where urban populations has actually been going up. Right along this Route 6 corridor is where you've seen most of the urban growth in this area. So you've got a lot of people moving away from the urban corridor that still need fast, frequent service. And I think a good way to address that is by developing express bus routes that go from either transfer points or small hubs to help you connect with the north-south route to improve mobility. You also see here that there's an express bus route that goes out to East Providence, and one opportunity here is to create a little bit more of a transit hub in the East Providence area. There already is one, but one that is more East Bay centric or Upper East Bay centric that makes it easier to move around on the east side of the Blackstone River. And I think that gives you good coverage within the urban core, the north, south, and east-west corridor. But in order to extend that further, commuter rail is something that is worth a conversation. There's already a little bit of talk about running something from Woonsocket down to Providence. There already is MBTA service that goes from Wickford Junction through and will stop at Pawtucket on the way to Boston. There is an opportunity to actually extend that, but right now the challenge with commuter rail in Rhode Island is that it's been outsourced to MBTA. So the commuter rail service that you have today really isn't designed for Rhode Island, it's designed for Massachusetts. And this is a little bit of a disconnect because when you look at Wickford Junction, about 80% of the riders who get on MBTA in Wickford Junction are going to Providence, they're not going to Boston. But the system is really designed to take passengers all the way to Boston. If you developed a Rhode Island commuter rail, you could terminate the MBTA service at Warwick, and you would have then 3 stops in Rhode Island. And then you could run your own commuter rail from Warwick all the way down to Kingston. And this would be a completely different configuration of train. It wouldn't be these, if you've ever seen the MBTA train that pulls out of Wickford Junction, it's 100 yards long. What you really need is a 2-car system that can carry a couple of hundred people. You can run it more frequently. That will drive ridership. Right now, there are only 10 trains a day that go past Providence. And it's also very expensive because any operating losses that are incurred by MBTA are reimbursed by RIDOT. So this is, the current solution is expensive, and it really doesn't address the needs of Rhode Islanders very well. The interesting thing is that with a certain commuter rail approach, you can extend the model of this network of regional hubs. So for example, if you had some connectivity on the South Coast in Kingston, the best way to get from the South Coast to Providence would be to get to Kingston where you could get on the commuter rail as opposed to running very long express bus routes from places like Westerly and Narragansett all the way up to Kennedy Plaza. So it's a scalable approach. When you see this with just 4 hubs like this, or 4 regional areas like this, you cover 93% of the state. It's about half of the geography of the state, but it's about 93% of the residents. So how do you move forward with a plan like this? The first thing you need is a really comprehensive plan. And this is particularly important now with so many projects that are already underway to make sure these pieces fit together in a comprehensive way. This plan has to look at all modes of transit. Jared talked about freedom, but a big piece of freedom is choice, having more than one way to get from point A to point B. Doing this should be viewed as an economic development opportunity as opposed to handling transit for people who can't afford cars. So moving forward, I think the goal should be for Rhode Island is to set realistic but achievable goals over the next decade. Getting your ridership up to 100,000 riders a day for RIPTA would still be slightly below the national average in terms of where you are, but you can only do that with a different kind of transit system than you're constrained with today. If you could double the number of commuters into Providence, for example, taking public transit, you'd still be half of what it is in Boston and well below what you see in Hartford, but it would dramatically increase Rhode Island and particularly Providence's regional competitiveness, which I think is the most important issue. And that is it.
Okay, thank you all so much. I think we're going to get to the Q&A portion now. I'll kick us off just with a question or two, and then we've got a mic here in the center of the room, so if you want to start lining up, you can feel free to do so. My first question is, as an outsider to transportation and learning about our transit system here, it strikes me as interesting that we have 2 different agencies, RIPTA that runs the buses, and RIDOT, which is running the ferries and the trains and some of the transit capital improvement projects. So I'm curious, is this normal? Does this happen in other states? And if not, or if so, does this represent certain opportunities or challenges for us in Rhode Island? So I'd love to hear some thoughts from the panel on that.
All right, I'll go first.
I didn't know if Jared wanted to comment on other places, but I'm happy also to talk about Rhode Island.
It is normal to have all kinds of weird relationships between agencies in the transit. It's completely normal. And there are all kinds of historic reasons why things are certain ways. And also, I just want to point out, when you're trying to figure out what the right organization is, your pattern is, you're always going to end up sort of integrating something by disconnecting something else. So I'm not going to judge on exactly how things should be organized. I do think, though, that if you intend, commuter rail, when it's really infrequent, like you've got 10 trips a day within the state, south of Providence, that's not going to interact very much with the bus service. It's not frequent enough to really work with connections. So as long as it's just that, it's probably not too much of a problem that it's disconnected from the bus agency. But as it becomes more frequent and as you start integrating it with the bus service, this becomes more of a problem. And so I would say that about it. I would also just observe, too, the same kind of principle applies to the interstate relationship. It may be the right thing to do politically for now to develop an intra-Rhode Island rail system. It's also the case that down the line, the state boundary will become more and more of a nuisance. I think particularly about Pawtucket and the ways that the real value proposition of Pawtucket and Central Falls has to be related to the proximity to Boston and not just the proximity to Providence. It has to be the total value proposition of all the places you can get to and all things you can do. So those are just a couple thoughts about that.
Well, I think Amy and I would probably say similar things. I mean, we have an extremely close working relationship with RIPTA. You know, I think our small size is a blessing and a curse, and that we do obviously operate different modes in different ways. But I think because of the size of the staff at RIDOT and the size of the staff at RIPTA, I honestly don't think we do very much that doesn't include the other, to be quite honest with you. I think our staffs are constantly together, interchangeable in some ways, and we work side by side, I feel, very well. It is a challenge, yes. It does require a lot more coordination on our part to get it right. But I think that we have the baseline for that, and that we do that now.
Yeah, and I would just say, as I'm sure folks know, RIPTA is a quasi-governmental agency. We're governed by a board of directors. Our board chair is here today, and I think that creates an accountability and a transparency with the public, you know, attending our meetings and really being aware of our budget and how we're expending our resources. And RIDOT is a department of state government, and I think the challenge and the opportunity is, historically, we have had this heavy rail commuter-based system, and I'm really glad Steve handles the relationship with Amtrak, because that's challenging. And then you had historically a bus-based system, but as we all know, transit exists on a continuum, and as we start moving towards BRT or light rail or expanding ferry, you know, we have to think about who's responsible for what, and I think our staffs, and we want to make a big investment in passenger infrastructure. RIDOT's really good at building things, we're really good at operating things, and so I think as we sort out each other's strengths and recognize those, it'll only get better moving forward.
I completely agree with that. And I think we each have our own, strengths in the transportation arena. And Amy's right, very good at operations. We're very good at building things. You know, we have different procurement methods, you know, and it's a great, I'd say, symmetry between us. To Jared's point about the state line, I think at RIDOT, we wholeheartedly agree with that as well, is that we do have to look at things regionally. You know, we don't look at MBTA as, stopping at the state line, and we don't view our transportation network that way either. And I think for Pawtucket and Central Falls, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. It's going to be the dynamic between both major cities to make that station a success. So I do think that with Rhode Island being so small as well, you know, from the MPO perspective, from our perspective, we're going to overlap into those neighboring states, whether it's Connecticut, you know, via Westerly, or Pawtucket into Massachusetts. Those elements have to be a part of our planning process because the catchment area doesn't stop at the state line.
To offer sort of an outsider's opinion on this, one of the challenges that you have with this multi-agency approach is that the allocation of revenue in the most effective way to serve Rhode Islanders. You've got now kind of a road and rails agency and a bus agency here, and it can be difficult to balance the priorities and the challenges among all the various modes of transit to provide the most optimum outcome. And I think that's the biggest challenge when you have this sort of structure. You can't necessarily do away with it, but it would be interesting if there were sort of an umbrella, sort of an ombudsman or something that could sort of work with both agencies to make sure that that fair and efficient allocation of resources to the greatest benefit of Rhode Island happens. I think that's really where the rubber meets the road.
Literally.
Yeah.
There's one more thing I want to say right now that's really important that is not really about this question, but it's a thing that I really have to say in wrapping up this panel. A lot of my business as a consultant arises from being flown into various cities, and sometimes I frankly need to explain transit to the transit agency. And then there are times like this where I need to fly in and say, wow, I've sat down with your transit agency staff, I've listened to them, I'm here to say exactly what they're saying to you in a deeper voice. But ultimately, it will be a lot cheaper for you in terms of consulting costs if you just listen to Amy. Because the planning staff at RIPTA totally knows what they're doing. They want to create exactly the kind of multi-centered structure that Roger Leaf just described. They are totally on top of that. It's a matter of money. And so when you hear someone say, oh, those buses, that's RIPTA, what do they know about development or whatever, please just step on that, because they know all about this stuff. One of the things about working in a transit agency is that you're used to talking to people who don't think you're very important, okay? And so here's an interesting dynamic. It's like the US and Canada, okay? One of the interesting things about the relationship between the US and Canada is that the Canadian media is full of American news, and the American media contains almost no Canadian news. So it's like we have this one-way mirror. They see us, we don't see them. Over time, they get smarter, right? Because they learn more, right? Because they have all of our news and we hear none of theirs. Okay, well, RIPTA's kind of in the position of Canada there, right? People are constantly coming and talking to RIPTA about what you should be doing for economic development, what you should be doing for us, and often this is not very sort of interested in what the sort of RIPTA thing is and what RIPTA's perspective should be. It's a lot like being Canada. And the thing is, that makes RIPTA really smart. That makes them really smart about what everybody else needs. And that makes them really smart about understanding everybody else's point of view, because they're hearing it all the time. And so they're actually, they actually know a lot already about whatever your particular perspective is, whether it's social service or economic development or getting a particular thing done in a particular place. So that's all just to say, you'll save a lot of money on consultants if you just listen to RIPTA, because they know what they're talking
And I'm
about.
done.
Let's hear some questions from the audience.
Still good morning everyone. First of all, I want to commend Grossmont, Scott Wolf, and John Flaherty again for putting on a great show. John, your name isn't in here, but it should. My hat's off to you, great job. I really liked everything I heard from this morning. I think, and I totally agree with Jarrett in that we should save a lot of money, because I do believe that we have the people here that have the potential to lead us in the right direction already. And that was a very good point that you made. I really enjoyed Roger, the Alliance. Oh, by the way, my name is Don Rhodes, and I'm a representative of the RIPTA Riders Alliance, and we are a nonprofit passenger advocate group. And in that capacity, I want to say that I was really encouraged, and I'm sure the rest of the Alliance will be, about the presentation from Jan with the Pawtucket Central Falls issue, because being a rider advocate group that we are, we were and probably still are very worried about the situation with the ridership in the Pawtucket Central Falls area because of the size of it. Julie, I really like the information about the hub, and because as part of the Yes on 630 movement in 2014, the Alliance took great pleasure in being a great part of that, which leads me to the transit corridor, which is very exciting. And when I was looking at the slides, everything was fine until the very bottom slide. And when I saw this, if I didn't mention what I'm going to mention, my conscience would drive me crazy. But I saw the words free fare. Now, unless you've been living under a stone lately, you know that because of the legislature and the funding that which they never give RIPTA enough to do their job adequately, so they're always under the gun. But RIPTA felt that they were forced to take the free passes away from the handicap and senior ridership and start charging them. And so when I see the word fare free under a study, even though it's only a study, when you're taking the free fare program away from the people who need it most, and all of a sudden you're considering making it part of the project, and I venture to say with people that probably can afford the ride, something really rubs me the wrong way about that. And it's really a serious mistake. Thank you.
Anybody want to comment?
I'll just respond quickly, and Don, we can talk more about it and continue to talk about it. There's no set fare policy. I put that in there, and we actually debated internally whether to include it. It's something that came out of our comprehensive fare study of the one state, one rate, and the short trips within the downtown, and how to make this new service successful to encourage both leaving your car at home and having to travel within the downtown throughout the day. So that might come about through companies in the downtown subsidizing that transit fare for the employers or the students through the UPass program. I don't know what the answer is. Really, at the end of the day, we're just trying to make the system more accessible to be that walk extender in the growing downtown area. So that might have been a better way to describe it, to not, to be more sensitive to the point you just made.
And also, I will be on Pat Ford's show tonight from 7 to 8 o'clock on AM 630 if you want to have further discussion about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I say a word on this? Just a word. There's an important accounting question here, and accounting may sound boring to you, but it's important in the way of how you understand the bang for buck that you're getting out of RIPTA. I really support discounted fares for lower-income people. I'm very supportive of that. But it matters a lot how you talk about it. Because if you're just going to RIPTA and saying, these people should have lower fares because they can't afford it and you should take that out of your budget, then you need to remember that you said that when you go back to them later and say, why aren't you running more service? You have all this money. Okay? So you got to just be clear about what you want RIPTA to do and not tell them to do contradictory things. And then they'll be able to do it, but you got to tell them what you want them to do, and you've got to understand that there are priorities there.
Hello, my name is Molly Hedry, and I'm with the East Coast Greenway Alliance, and I feel compelled to just talk a bit about active transportation and how it connects in the fold. If we're talking about giving folks options, active transportation, biking and walking, of course, should be part of the mix. So really exciting stuff happening in Providence with the train station and then the new train station hub in Pawtucket and Central Falls. And I'm just curious what kind of conversations are happening about how to integrate active transportation to get to those hubs and to give folks those options. And then keeping in mind that oftentimes having a bus hub in conjunction with a train station hub, mixing bikes and pedestrians with buses can be a challenge. So just curious what kind of conversations are happening at the table to bring active transportation into the fold.
I don't think there's a new bus or rail facility that will be built in Rhode Island that won't fully accommodate bike accommodations. I mean, I think that's where we're at, and I know that the city is out to bid for a bike share program, and that's also something we're considering as part of the DTC station design, but bike amenities will certainly be...
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the Providence Intermodal Transportation Center as part of the planning grant. We've looked at that, and is obviously going to be something that's fully integrated. I think, especially with what's coming out of the Green Economy Bond and the new bike paths and biking amenities that are coming with that. That's connection points and things that we have to look at. I think both for Amy and I, as we look at the planning network and the transportation network as a whole at these key locations. As far as Pawtucket Central Falls goes, we have done kind of a safety road assessment at RIPTA around that station, which is coming to a close shortly. We have looked at all modes accessing the station, including bike, pedestrian, bus, car, and as we pull that to a close in the next couple of weeks. We'll be sitting down with the municipalities, with RIPTA, all the stakeholders that were a part of that safety roadway assessment to make sure that we're itemizing and identifying any areas of conflict to be resolved, and kind of schedule out a plan of addressing those issues with the rail station coming on board, as well as the bus hub, within the next few years. Those are items that, we'll want to take a look at, and as well are included in the DoD vision plan to make sure that it's accessible, by any mode possible. So there is definitely, as Jan pointed out in her slides, work to be done there, but I think we've aligned a number of resources to hopefully assist with that and get us going in the right direction.
I'll just say one more thing on pedestrian safety. Every end of a transit trip is a pedestrian trip, and so we are huge advocates of pedestrian safety. We have a bus stop design guide that's about to come out that was intended for RIDOT engineers and municipalities and their engineering crews, so when they're doing roadway projects, pedestrian safety, particularly around bus stops, is accounted for.
And I'd just add that in Pawtucket, we have just to the north of us the Blackstone Bikeway. And to the south of us, we have the linear bridge over the Washington Bridge. And coming in on the east side, we're piecing together half-mile by half-mile connections so that those bike paths can connect. And that slide I had about connecting to highway exits is also how do we get the bike paths and designated, whether they're on street or not, how do we connect to some of these designated bikeways? So it's the fun of the experience as well as just a way to get there.
Yeah.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question.
I know we just have a couple of minutes. My name is Gail. I'm from the Rhode Island Health Department, and I just want to thank everybody for their great work. This is, I guess, the message that we need to leave with is to leverage our resources to work in a collaborative world. It's all about teamwork and sharing subject matter experts. I know for a fact that Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott is very much involved with every facet of public health, which includes transportation. Critical to transportation is access to healthy foods, health care. It's an integrated process. We need to think about this as the big picture. But also in the health equity zones, there are 10. We have 10 backbone agencies working throughout the state doing amazing work. Thunder Miss Health Center, South County Health, Local Initiative Support Corporation, One Neighborhood Builders, North Providence School Department. This is a wealth of resource for anyone in this room to reach out to these people. They're amazing people. They're doing amazing work in all of our cities and focusing on vulnerable populations. So thank you all, and please reach out to the health department. Check out the health equity zones. We're here to help. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to invite Scott Wolf back up to the stage here.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, Tom. Great way to summarize a lot of what's taken place today. Rajiv and the panel, thank you all very much. It's been a lot of information, a lot of ideas flowing, I'm sure, through all our heads. I know through mine. I just wanted to try to take a real stab at summarizing a couple of the takeaways here. First, I think it's important, and I want to thank Jared also for giving us so much vision and perspective and great analysis and reality checks. I think it's important for us to get this issue right. Obviously, that's almost very obvious. But this is important. It's important not only for mobility, it's important for economic development, it's important for quality of place. It's a central issue for the overall well-being of the state's future. And I think we need to communicate that very clearly and strongly to people who are not here today. And as Buff was indicating, or at least implying, I think, we need to get the business community and we need to get the governor, who's already predisposed to be supportive of this, but we need to get both the business community and the governor to view this not just as a nice thing, but as a necessary thing and as a front burner issue, not just a medium or back burner issue. I think that's where we have to go with this energy and this information and this dialogue, and we need to act quickly. I think we need a master plan for transit. I think we need to have RIPTA be a lead player in that, because We've obviously gotten validation from an international transit consultant that we've got tremendous talent here at RIPTA. So let's use that. Let's elevate them by listening to them more and by giving them more money and by looking at some of the innovative ideas and options that we have before us. I think another message is we can't, if we want to have a first-class transit system, as opposed to just a politically correct transit system, we can't be all things to all people. We've got to look at where we can have the level of frequency and the level of user-friendliness that's going to increase ridership in a significant way. And that's going to take some political courage, and it's going to take some vision. I think, though, overall, another takeaway is there are a lot of talented, dedicated, visionary people here in Rhode Island working on this. We've got the talent base to make great things happen here. And so I'm encouraged overall, even though there clearly are a lot of challenges. Couple of housekeeping things. I want to thank Renewable now for, once again, being a great partner with us in videoing all of this activity and making it available to a larger audience. I want to encourage you all to stay engaged with Grow Smart Rhode Island on Facebook. Get our newsletter at sign up for our newsletter at growsmartri.org if you haven't already done that. And don't be bashful if you really like what we're doing and like the way we're bringing people together to discuss important issues that don't fit on a bumper sticker. Don't be bashful about supporting us financially. A number of you already do, but you can go to our website, hit the donate button, and explore various ways to donate to us that way. In any event, I think it's been a great morning. I hope you've all enjoyed it. You've made it a great morning, and let's keep the dialogue going, and let's make even better things happen on the transit front for the future. Thank you all.